Sarah Chamberlin is a founder and executive director of Flok Health and a passionate advocate for the metabolic community. As a mother of a child with PKU, her personal journey shaped her mission to improve care, foster connection, and accelerate progress for those living with metabolic disorders. In this episode, we cover how community, collaboration, and self-advocacy can transform metabolic care. We discuss what it means to be your own best advocate, how families and caregivers can offer meaningful support, and what the future of patient-centered healthcare could look like. Settle in and join us for an inspiring conversation on Metabolically Speaking. You'll come away reminded that every voice in the metabolic community has power to shape better care. Welcome to Metabolically Speaking, the podcast that dives into life with inherited metabolic conditions. Proudly brought to you by Carewith, delivering therapeutic nutrition for more than 25 years and empowering families to live without limits. I'm your host, Meredith Baker. I've lived with PKU my whole life, so I know the ups and downs and all the in-between moments that come with navigating a rare condition. Each month, I sit down with experts, advocates, and people with lived experiences for honest conversations about what it really means to live with a metabolic condition. Whether you're newly diagnosed, supporting someone you love, or have been on this journey for a while, this space is for you. So settle in and let's get into it. Welcome, everyone, to the 5th episode of Metabolically Speaking. Joining me today is Sarah Chamberlin, founder and executive director of Flok Health, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving care and treatment for those living with inherited metabolic disorders. Founded in 1989 as National PKU News, Flok supports individuals with metabolic conditions through the comprehensive range of programs they offer. These include the Flok app and research program, community-focused activities such as camps and academic scholarship program, online support networks, and educational resources for the broader community. Sarah's younger daughter, Izzy, was born with PKU in 2013 and inspired her development of the How Much Feet app for low-protein diet management. She has since led the organization's transformation into Flok, expanding its focus to a broader community and a fuller picture of health to drive improvements in care and research. Flok's work centers around patient experience through the personal connection and vital data to advance care, research, and quality of life for its community. Sarah, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Yes, it's going to be great. Thank you so much. We have a fantastic topic planned for today's episode, covering how community, collaboration, and self-advocacy can transform metabolic care. Let's get stuck right into it. Sarah, as a founder and executive director of Flok Health, and as a mother of a child with PKU, we'd love to start by hearing a bit about your personal journey. How did your family's experience shape your goals and ultimately lead you to the creation of Flok Health?
Sure. Well, like a lot of people, when their child is diagnosed with PKU, they go out and they get the low protein food list for PKU. And, we were told, obviously metabolic formula is incredibly important, but all you have to do is take this book, look up everything she eats, write down the milligrams of phi, add it up for lunch, add it up for dinner, don't forget breakfast, and just do that every single day for 18 years and she'll be fine. And well, that's great advice in terms of, formula and making sure you count phi and get the diet right. The idea that we would be doing this and carrying this book around for 18 years, I sort of said, I'm not going to do that. And, it was 2013. We had, iPhones, we had other resources that were readily available. And so I spent the sort of first couple months of Izzy's life coming up with a proof of concept for what would become the How Much Feet app. And I had a technical background, so I was running a technical firm at that point. And I used publicly available data from the USDA, and I just created a little sort of web app that said, okay, we could look up foods. Here's the data. And at that point, it was just to look it up. It was just so we wouldn't carry that book around. And I sent it to National PKU News because they were the holders. They've developed this resource for decades. And I said, can we do this? And there was a little back and forth, but it was ultimately decided, yes, this was a great, resource for the community. We got a grant. And when Izzy was 11 months old, we launched the How Much Fee app, and we had about 1,000 subscribers in the first week. It was obviously like not just me who didn't want to carry this book around. And so that was great. And, within a couple of months, we thought, well, okay, it's great to be able to look up food, but what if we could track the food? And then what if we could export that to the dietitian? Because they're always asking for that 3-day food log, before your blood spots. So what can we do? So we added features, and we sort of continued doing that. We brought on a dietitian so we could add foods, because it's great that, we had over 10,000, or we had about, I think, 8,000 foods in the last food list book. But every time a new food comes out, and thank goodness new foods are coming out all the time, we need to understand the fee in them. So we sort of built up that dietary resource in a great way. And I think that was really, really incredibly important for the community. In 2020, we had been involved in the PKU Northwest camp in Oregon through our board of directors, the president of our board also leading that organization. And when COVID hit, they could not do their in-person camp. So we said, well, we have this great community. We've got, several thousand people in our Facebook group. We've got all these subscribers. What if we did a virtual camp and we send everybody a cooking kit and then we all get together online? And that was the first, outside of the Facebook group, that was the first sort of real community or communal focused activity that we added into what PKU News was doing. And we grew that. Now we have camps on both coasts, and, we had over 500 people, and we have the adult retreat, which is really fantastic. We had over 500 people this year at camp. But we sort of saw a bit of stasis. There wasn't a lot of change in the community. If someone was diagnosed in 2020, they were being told exactly the same thing, with the exception of maybe carry the book around. They were maybe being told use How Much Fee. But the same thing, okay, we can maintain, we can prevent damage with the diet. And for us, we needed to see more progress. We needed to do more than just prevent, the damage that untreated PKU could do. And so we also saw a huge power in the community. And, frankly, because a lot of us are sort of tech geeks, we saw a huge power in the ability of patient data to help us understand these conditions. And so we made 3 pivots when we decided to become Flok Health. And, core of that was we didn't just want to focus on PKU. PKU is the largest of these inborn errors of protein metabolism, and so they get a lot of focus. They get a lot of interest from researchers, and there's more treatments for them. But we're all sharing this core low protein diet. So it seemed like a natural thing to include those other conditions. Some of them that Flok serves, so I'll just run through them. That's classical HCU, MSUD, tyrosinemia, the organic acidemias, PKU, and obviously PKU, and then the urea cycle disorders. And all of them, some of them have lower tolerances, some of them have higher tolerances, some are more acute, but we all sort of share that low protein diet, and also I think have the ability to, the larger PKU population might have more data to share with those smaller populations, and the conditions that are more acute might have more information to share with PKU or the other conditions as we all sort of go through this journey. So we focusing not just on PKU, not just on diet, because so many of the questions that we hear day after day are not necessarily about diet. It's about mental health. It's about learning. It's about, community connections. All these things are, is it related to my metabolic condition or is it something else? And so we needed to better understand that. And then the third pivot was that support is essential. That community connection is essential. And the resources that we provide to help manage, diet in daily life, those are core. But we also wanted to be able to drive research because we wanted to move move forward. And so I'll just make one point on the name, because I always get asked, what is flok? Is it
Yeah,
an acronym? Why do you call it flok? And we made that choice because individuals come together in a flock in a flock or in a group for protection and support, but also to go someplace. And so that really symbolized the fact that we were continuing the support, we were providing the resources, but we weren't just coming together. We were also determined to make progress with this organization.
absolutely. And you could definitely tell from hearing how you had the 1,000 subscribers, was it, in the first bit of you
Yeah, a couple.
starting? So you could tell the need that it has grown and how it's changed and developed, and it's just still growing today. And it's just beautiful with how you can see and hear the story of it transforming. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. We see that Flock's mission is to rally the community to continuously improve care for those with metabolic disorders and accelerate scientific progress. Could you share how that mission comes to life day to day to bridge these lived experiences with scientific innovation?
Sure. So there's sort of two parts to that, and I want to address both of them. The rally of the community is really important, because that sort of stasis that I talked about, that like, okay, we have this condition and we can, it's sort of a maintenance mode. And I want people to understand that we can change. The patient and caregiver community, we can drive that change. I want them excited about it. A lot of people talk about, particularly in rare disease, of being guinea pigs. Like, oh, I've got to be in this clinical trial, and I got to take my blood again, or I got to fill out this survey again. And they don't often see the results of that. It doesn't come back to the community in the short term, or sometimes not at all. It might lead to the development of a treatment, but that's 5, 10 years down the road. And so I want people to feel like there's something immediate that they can get involved and they can see results. And scientific progress or innovation relies on understanding. And understanding requires data. Data is just human experience in a way that scientists can process and draw conclusions from it. It's, what you're eating on a daily basis or how you're feeling on a daily basis. And if we can bring that together and quantify it, we can start to understand what it looks like for the community. But none of that happens without connection. You have to, the population, the community needs to understand the value of research. Why am I doing this? Frankly, what's in it for me, or what's in it for my family member, or what's in it for my friends? Like, how is this going to change life? They need to trust the people doing the researchers. And I think that's an advantage that Flock has, because we do have this community connection. And then ultimately, like I said, they need to get something out of it. Like, if you're in a clinical trial, you may not get anything out of that. But we're determined to build resources that both help you in your daily life and can contribute to this mode of progress.
I love to hear that. That is very interesting with hearing different perspectives also whenever you're going about with giving data as the patient or as the caregiver, and then also the clinicians and researchers obtaining the data. Being able to work together definitely shows where we can take this data and soar with. Haha, you can say that in.
Lots
I
of
mean,
lots of flock puns are going to happen, I'm
yeah,
sure.
lots of flock puns, of course, of course. The flock family started it. Well, the power of community is something that we explore often on this podcast. Can you share with us and the metabolic community what it means to you personally and why it's so important for those living with or caring with someone with a metabolic disorder to have these community connections?
Sure. So I remember when Izzy was diagnosed, and, day 6 of life, we went up to Mount Sinai Hospital, and and they sort of ran us through. They gave us formula. They ran us through what we were looking at, and I don't know that we even asked a lot of questions then, but I remember they said, "Well, there are support groups for this. There's lots of options. There's support groups. You don't have to do this alone." And I remember where I was. I was sort of we took a cab home, and we were on the sort of overpass that gets to the Brooklyn Bridge. And I said to my husband, I said, I'm sure the support groups are great. And I'm sure the people in there are amazing. And I don't want to meet any of them. And that was because I was like, I don't want to, I was resisting the diagnosis. I was in the sort of denial phase of what we were dealing with. And I said, I'm sure they're lovely, but I don't want to meet them. And that perspective has changed. I'll say that. You know, I think meeting them is and working with people is the best part of my job, and the community is the best part of what I do. Um, but and I think I also realized it was essential because these conditions are isolating. I mean, we were living in Brooklyn, so probably one of the cities, or New York City, with the one of the higher populations of PKU just by population density. And we still didn't have anyone we knew who had even heard of this disease. Although a friend of mine said, "Oh yeah, that's the Diet Coke disease." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she was like, "Oh, I drink 3 Diet Cokes every day, and every can says phenylketonuria contains aspartame." And so I always knew there was some sort of disease associated with Diet Coke. Now, it's not actually associated with Diet Coke, but that's, in the larger world, that was her conception. So, uh, having community and having someone who understands what you're going through in any rare disease is essential to making you feel not alone. And so obviously I turned out that I realized that those support groups weren't like in the basement of community centers, which is what I was imagining. There's not enough of us really to do that in person. But those online connections that we make, I mean, I know so many people through, our groups online. And I feel like I know them, and I feel like they know me, and they know the experience, or they might know my kid. And then when we have the chance to come together in person and meet each other and be like, "Oh, you're taller than I thought you would be," or, "Oh, your eyes are brown, not green," or whatever. Um, you know, that's really the magic. And that's, I think one of the things, like the flock camps that we do, but
Mhm.
any chance to connect in person, whether it's at like a regional event or something else, is really essential, because you have that baseline of understanding.
Yeah.
And once you have that, I'm not saying that everyone with a metabolic disorder has become fast friends, but they do have a shared bond
For
that I
sure.
think is really important.
Definitely. The shared bond is there, the connections are there, and once you go to an event, whether it's camp or a conference or any type of cooking class, anything you're going to, you just wanna go to more. Like, at least that's the experience I have felt, and you just are like, "When's the next one? Can we plan another? Could there be another and another?" And it's just so inviting and so exciting to see, to be able to sit down with people and not have to explain what's on your plate, or have to explain why you have to go get your formula out of the fridge, or things like that. So I think the power of connection is huge, and that's definitely important and something that we've all been able to learn throughout the years and as time goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It always amazes me at camp every year. There's
Mhm.
someone who says, "Oh, this is my first time meeting someone with a metabolic condition," or "This is
Mhm.
my kid's first time." There was an 8-year-old this year at East Camp, and it was the first time. And he lives on the East Coast. There's other people. It's rather small area, but it's just hard to connect in person.
Yeah.
And so for that kid to be able to meet other people, and like you said, not have to explain all the things
Yeah.
that you have to explain on a daily basis almost.
Yeah.
Is just really, it's really normalizing, and it adds a level of comfort that I think is really important. And then once you start to feel that comfort, you can carry it out into your daily life when you're not, when you're around people who may not get it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, leaning into the importance of self advocacy, could you share some examples on how someone with a metabolic disorder can be their own best advocate? What activities, tools, or programs Flock offers to help individuals gain confidence and take active role in their own care?
Sure. I mean, I think this varies for everyone,
Yep.
by the person. And someone might have, do all these methods of self-advocacy, and some might feel comfortable just sort of sharing their story. Like, that's one of the greatest things. Like, oh, I was just reading someone the other day saying, I was born in 1962 and I was one of the first people diagnosed with PKU in this country. And here's my story, which is really different than, my kid's story or your story, Meredith. Like
Mhm.
the sort of
Yeah.
breadth of experience we have in this community. But I feel like, and maybe it's because I have like a English creative writing degree, I feel like stories are really, really powerful in terms of
Yeah.
understanding. And I feel like telling your story is a form of advocacy. Helping people understand what you go through brings empathy, brings understanding, ultimately brings engagement and support. And so I feel like telling your story is a form of advocacy. For other people, it's taking their daily experience and turning it into data, whether that's as part of a research study, a survey, a clinical trial, or, using the Flock app to say, okay, I'm recording what I'm experiencing. And then I'm going to go to my clinician and say, listen, ever since I grew 3 inches, I feel like I'm more tired. Like, I'm just making stuff up, but growth spurts are real, and
Yeah.
needing to change the diet is real in those. And being able to show up with that data, I think is really important, and sort of say, "This is me, quantified, and this is, this is the help I need from you as a clinician." For other people, it's connecting in camps. One of my favorite things about our camps is that we have all these small groups,
Mhm.
and someone will say, okay, I think Meredith, you've led a couple of groups, but
Yeah.
someone who is really good, at um, packing, picking out the foods for their kids and packing lunches that they want, will do a session on how to sort of make your kid a good lunch when they go to school. Or we'll talk about athletics in Berner's metabolism, or we'll talk about transition to adulthood. And so those people, I mean, we always joke in rare disease that like people with conditions and their caregivers know way more than their doctors when they go in. Like, we're always teaching the medical professionals, right?
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is we can teach each other too,
Yeah.
because someone may have an understanding that, my kid is gonna bump up against in 2 years. So I feel like saying to everyone in the community, you know something special because your experience is unique. Can
Mhm.
you share that? And that's a way of advocating for yourself and, helping everyone else in the community. I think ultimately, we have the Flock research platform, which is designed, like I said, to sort of take that data and not only, I mean, I gave the example of someone advocating for their own personal care with it, um, but the ability to take that daily care and put it into a research platform that is governed and owned by the community. You know, Everyone who puts data into that owns that. They can take it out if they don't want it there. Um, but adding all our shared experiences together to start to really characterize what those experiences look like on a community-wide basis is another way of advocating for yourself.
That is great to hear, and it definitely is, interesting to also hear that for those who are wanting to give data but not sure how it works, the data is yours, as Sarah's saying, so you can always withdraw it if you ever want to, so that is important. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's there forever. You're in control, so I think that's a beautiful thing that Flock has. Well, for parents and caregivers or family members listening, what are some of the best ways for them to support someone living with a metabolic condition? How can loved ones also step into the role of being an advocate?
I also wanna hear your opinion on this,
Okay.
Meredith. But, I'll say I think the first thing that occurs to me is that listening is important.
Mhm.
Listening to the individual with a condition, and understanding if they want you to advocate for them. Sometimes I'm like, "Okay, we're gonna go to this restaurant, but I'm gonna talk to the chef ahead of time, and I'm gonna make sure he cooks your pasta." And my kid's like, "Please don't. I'm not into that right now. Like, I'm just gonna have fries, or I'm just gonna, eat before we go." Like,
Yeah.
maybe they want you to advocate and maybe they don't.
Yeah.
And so I think once you determine that, like, then you have the ability to step into a role as advocate. I think that There are ways educating people, whether that's when your kid is there or ahead of time. I mean, I'll give an example that just happened yesterday. Is he was going to a sleepover party and it was very focused on food. There was high tea, and so everyone was having these special things. And um, so I made what I could in terms of food that would match what they were having, and I took it over there ahead of time. So it wasn't I didn't show up and say like, "I'm here with all these special foods for Izzy because she has a special diet." It was just like, "Let's just get that done, and then when dinner's served, she'll have what she needs." And so sometimes advocacy can be loud, and sometimes it can be quiet. I think for family members of adults with metabolic conditions, there's a lot of additional burdens. I always say it's maybe easier to be a kid with a metabolic condition than it is for an adult, because you have all these people hovering around you trying to help you. You don't have a job. You don't have, you know, kids to take care of. You don't have all these additional burdens or responsibilities that you might have as an adult. So for those, maybe it's like just taking care of ordering formula or, something else that the adult with a condition might not have the time to do. Um, Also, when we talk about sort of legislative advocacy or really speaking out, um, you know, you, Meredith, might not have time to take off from your job to go talk to your congressperson, but your family member can go in and advocate for you as, a member of that community and say like, listen, my kid deals with this or my spouse deals with this. There are a lot of ways to do that you know, I think again, and I feel like I keep giving this answer, but like it varies person to person. Like, what does the individual want you to do, and what are they comfortable with, and then how can you be most helpful for them? And that's really, I think, goes back to that listening to them and asking them.
Yes, Sarah, you make some great points there with it sounds cliche, but with saying that it depends on the individual, of course, dependent on the individual on how they even want to be sharing their PKU or how their journey is going. Advocacy could be so different for everyone. So you make a great point with that. Um, you said you want me to answer the same question. I would say having my family be an advocate. I mean, as an adult, I guess it's different, but at the same time, I think it's very dependent on the moment, on how you want to be explaining your PKU. For instance, your restaurant example you gave, maybe Izzy didn't feel the need for the chef to know everything about what she was able to or not able to eat, but she knew she wanted to eat green beans or she knew she wanted a salad or something like that. So I think just seeing the boundaries maybe on what the person's wanting and also being able to share PKU or whatever metabolic condition it is. How much does this person that you're talking with actually need to know? Is this someone that you're going to see like on a regular basis that it would benefit you? Or is this just someone that you're meeting, introducing yourself, and you'll never see them again?
Yeah, for
That might
sure.
that might sound silly, but in that moment, is that conversation just gonna turn into a PKU conversation, or is this something else? So, I think it depends on the situation also.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's the person and the situation and all of those intersect to sort of determine. So it's real easy to see how to become an advocate, I think is what we concluded.
There are many different ways to care for metabolic disorders, and at the center is often the low protein diet. Can you touch on the importance of dietary management and how it may evolve from childhood to adulthood and how people can navigate the transition, especially when moving on to new treatments or entering new life stages?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the low protein diet, and that's the foundation of National PKU News was, the low protein food list for PKU, and also the newsletter, which provided that sort of community aspect and connection. But it is core to all of the conditions that Flock serves. That's how we sort of defined the conditions that we serve. There are other inborn errors of metabolism, but they might deal with fats or carbohydrates, and we're focused
Yeah.
on that low protein group. And I always feel like, within that, PKU is a little unique because the condition was discovered, they could characterize, what was going on, these high levels of phenylalanine in the blood. And then the low protein diet was developed, and in
Yeah.
the 1950s. But it wasn't until newborn screening in the 1960s that we could say, okay, we can treat this from birth. And so it wasn't like, oh, we've discovered this and we can detect it and now we need a treatment for it. The treatment, the low protein diet, actually existed prior to our ability to diagnose it, on a wide scale for newborn screening. So I think that's always fascinating, because it's like low protein diet was waiting there and ready, and it was that key innovation of newborn screening, which was, one of the founding board members of PKU News was Dr. Guthrie, because he saw the ability to sort of bring all those things together, and also that we were going to need to support these people now that we were diagnosing them at birth. How are we going to continue to treat them? And so, we've always had, being founded by a dietitian, our organization has always had diet at its core. And I think as new treatments come online for all these conditions, that doesn't change. I think what's fascinating is, even for people who have higher tolerances, there are some people who have a 3-gram tolerance. There's some people who have a 30-gram tolerance. That is still a restricted diet. It's just a different level of restriction, perhaps, but I see people, as they go on a treatment that liberalizes their diet, that's still hard to do. They're used to sticking to that 6 grams. So how do they get to 8 in a day? Or how do they get, they eat that one macadamia nut? Is that going to take them from 6 to 8? And is that how they do it? And even for treatments in PKU that completely liberalize the diet and represent an unrestricted diet, you still need to learn to eat on that unrestricted diet. It is such a different mindset than you have grown up with, that there is still, the diet as it changes is still at the core of treatment. And it may be just a mental switch to learn, how do I change from those low protein foods that I grew up on and love and are sort of comfort foods, to moving into other foods. I think that teaching, you're talking about sort of how do we navigate transitions either to new treatments, and I touched a little bit on that. I was asked one time, like, how do you add more protein to the diet? And I said, well, I can tell you how to do it, but not in a healthy way. I was like, for my kid, when she got a couple more grams of protein, it was Pringles and Pop-Tarts, because she had never had those things before. I mean, I remember one time somebody brought there was like a gift bag at school for someone's birthday, and it was like a tiny tin of Pringles. It had like 4 Pringles in it. And Izzy just gave them to me. And I was like, do you want to try one? Like, do you want to understand what it is? She's like, I can't have Pringles. And I was like, well, you can, we can't eat them in large quantities and all the time. And that's the problem with Pringles, is you want to eat them in large quantities all the time. But, but to her, it was like Pringles were like poison to her. And
Yeah.
she was like, what are you trying to do to me? And I was like, no, you can try them. It's sort of in moderation, and you have to understand that might mean you can't have something else. You can't have a dessert with dinner, or you have to eat a lower protein dinner. And so I think teaching, as people go through those life stages, teaching kids the why of the restrictions is really important. Not just that you have this restriction and you have to stick to it, but the reason we do this, and sort of where there's flexibility, where you can trade off. It's not that this thing is going to cause you immediately to be sick. It's that, it can't be incorporated into your diet on a regular basis. And so that's why that basis of low protein foods, low protein pasta is like, you got to have it, because if you're hungry and you're out of feed, that's the thing you can do. And I think that as people sort of move on to those new treatments, or their tolerance liberalizes, I think when you look at women with PKU who are pregnant and their tolerance goes up, that's like a huge learning curve. So how can we help them do not only the sort of day-to-day switch of, okay, I got to get some higher protein foods in here, but the mental switch of, this is okay and this is actually healthy for me. And I think you see that in growth spurts too. Like, it's just this education of why we need to restrict and where and how we need to liberalize.
Yeah. Definitely makes sense, and I think it is a big mental switch that you are referring to because even hearing of friends that I have that now are on Palynziq and are able to try new foods that they would have never been able to try before. I mean, like, it's hard to put yourself in that situation to think about what it's like, but imagine traveling to a new country and they're eating some exotic food, maybe it's an exotic animal or something, and it's just something that you've never seen anyone else eat, but then imagine that being all your friends being like, "But it's good, just eat it, it's good, just try it, just try it, just try it, you can have it now." But you're like, "This looks very weird." Like, you might be you might be used to eating that chicken nugget, but, like, to me, that's an exotic thing that is just something to wrap your head around. So, definitely, I think giving grace for people whenever they're trying new, medications or formulas or whatever it is with whatever they're, now working with drinking that new formula, eating that new food, being more restricted so they can have a pregnancy or whatever they're going through in that moment. Just it's different shoes that they're in than what you've ever been in if you don't have a metabolic condition. So just giving patience and grace is probably the best place to start.
Yeah, and I think that's a place that's really important for clinicians to understand. We're actually lucky to have a few clinicians in this community who do have PKU, and so they get it.
Yeah.
Like, they got it. They're like,
Yeah.
"I know where this is coming from." But it is really hard. I think a lot of people are like, "Well, you can have meat now. You can have this. Eat this. Eat this. This is an option for you." And they see it as a positive and something, maybe you've expressed the desire to have. Maybe the individual with the condition has said, I would love to be able to eat a cheese stick. Um, but when it comes time to eat that cheese stick, it's still that, like you're saying, that exotic food that has maybe felt risky and scary. And so it's not all positive. It's not just like, I have this freedom now. And so talking with clinicians about that, I think is really important because it's hard for someone who doesn't have a condition to say anything other than eat this. You've been wanting to eat this. You can now eat this. And maybe you're like, not quite ready
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah. For sure. That makes sense, and it's true. Obviously, everyone's journey is different, and it goes back to what we've been saying this whole episode, but it depends on the individual.
We have
But
no conclusions here. Just
no
just
conclusions. We're
roll
just
of the dice every
in
time. Yeah.
circles. We're just flying in circles. Okay. Well, access to constant, high quality healthcare can be a challenge for those living with metabolic disorders. From your perspective, are the current healthcare options truly meeting people's needs? And what kinds of collaborations between patient, industry, and clinicians do you think are most essential to drive better care overall?
Yeah. So, in a word, no, current healthcare options are not meeting the needs of this community. I think we just talked about how low protein foods and medical formula are the baseline of treatment for all of these conditions. And the fact is that a lot of people don't have coverage. A lot of people have really poor coverage or at risk or inconsistent coverage for those things. I mean, it's basic and it's sort of stupefying because the premise of newborn screening and the only way a condition can get on the newborn screening panel is that if we can treat it. There are conditions that we can detect, but we can't treat. And so those aren't actually on the newborn screening panel because you don't want to say, here's your newborn, they have this condition, we can do nothing for you. And so the premise of PKU being the first condition on newborn screening and on every state's newborn screening is that we can treat it. And the way we treat that is metabolic formula and low protein foods. And that is true for those other conditions as well, for MSUD or for, HCU. I mean, whether they get detected is a question because, again, every state has different regulations. But the idea that we can treat them with this metabolic formula and foods is fundamental. And so, given the way that our laws are structured, we have state by state laws. Depends on where you live, what your age is, what your gender is, what your condition is, what your insurance type is, if you take oral formula or you take it through a G tube. All of those things play into whether your state's going to cover or require your insurance to cover your metabolic food and formula. And so that's just sort of like at best, insufficient and at worst discriminatory. It means that people maybe can't take a new job because they're going to lose their health coverage that, for their metabolic treatment. It means maybe they can't move to a different state. It means sometimes they get married. I mean, I've heard people have said to me, we're going to get divorced because then as separate individuals, I can get this coverage. And the idea that, despite the fact that we have this baseline of treatment and that we have this sort of federal endorsement that this is the way to go, that people have to upend their lives just to get this baseline treatment is pretty important. I think I'll go back to one of the things I said earlier about self-advocacy. I think telling your story, helping legislators understand what it means to you to have coverage or not have coverage is really essential. Because without that, it's all sort of numbers. They look at, ERISA and they look at state regulation numbers and insurance coverage rates. But if you can come in and say, listen, this is what not having coverage means to me. This is what I miss. People are like, we bought formula instead of going on a family vacation. Or we had to put off this surgery because we couldn't have the formula that would have prepared them and put them in a stable state to have this surgery. Those are real world impacts that I think people can start to understand. There is, ultimately, I think the goal here or the solution, and I'll use that term lightly because even when we pass legislation, it takes a long time to implement and there's always issues. But I think the path towards that is a federal law. So there's a medical nutrition. It was called the Medical Nutrition Equity Act. It is now the Access to Food and Medical Food and Formulas Act. That is a piece of legislation that's been introduced over and over. This is the 6th or 7th congressional term to set a federal floor for coverage that says everyone in this country should get medical foods and formula covered for a certain select group of metabolic and GI conditions. And that means that whether you live in Massachusetts or California or Texas or wherever, and what kind of insurance you have, or whether you're married or whether you're, over 25 or under 3, your insurance has to cover it. And that to me is going to at least give a baseline of treatment to everyone.
Yeah.
And so I think, we were talking about advocacy, telling your story, getting people to understand it is really important. And there's, that bill is in Congress. The House bill is HR 5684, and the Senate bill is going to be introduced hopefully before the end of 2025. And that's really, that's not a political issue. It is all of us needing baseline. We have, both parties are supporting the legislation because they understand that it's really just a fundamental healthcare issue. I think the other thing when you asked about clinicians collaborating, I think that one thing that they can do is cook with us. We got a lot of handouts of here's a recipe. But then I'd look at that recipe and be like, I don't have any of these ingredients. I don't know what some of them are. And it also takes me 3 hours to cook.
Yeah.
And maybe my kid at that point wasn't going to like it. I think clinicians who do cooking classes are amazing and fantastic. I want them to understand, again, going back to diet being that fundamental treatment, I want them to understand what the diet looks like in the kitchen or in the home. I also love those dietitians who come to camp and cook with us. And they don't have to be just dietitians, doctors. We take geneticists. We take anyone who wants to come and sort of understand that lived experience. Because it's one thing to just have that recipe printed out. And then there's another thing to see how long it takes to cook or, where you have to drive to get those ingredients and how that really impacts the family. And that's outside of medical food and formula. But it really is back to that diet being central, the central care for these conditions. And that's healthcare. I mean, a lot of that, the management and healthcare of these conditions goes on in the home. It's not like you go and you get a surgery and that, then you come home and you're fixed. It is you
Mhm.
go and you have a diagnosis and you have a plan. But families and individuals with these conditions are the ones who sort of implement that treatment plan.
For sure. I think it's definitely to the point where you say, like, have the clinicians or dietitians come in, like, "Come try a day in the life with us." It's like, "Come experience it." Even seeing, people try formula, I think is fun. Like, whether it's a family member, a friend, or clinician, dietitian, whoever it is, just trying the formula, like, "Yeah, I have to drink a lot of ounces of that a day." Like like, however much you have to drink a day, I have to drink that much of this a day. So, just that little bit, just seeing, what the experience is like, but then also having it at camp so the people with the metabolic condition could giggle whenever we're seeing each other.
Yeah, I used to do like go and talk to dietetics programs because,
Mhm.
you hear that from dietitians or doctors. Okay, there was like a 2-minute segment on
Yeah.
PKU in medical school or in my
Mhm.
training.
Mhm.
And so I always like to come back and, if there's particularly dietitians, I want to encourage them to be metabolic dietitians. We need more metabolic dietitians. So
Yeah.
if there's, a college near me or something that's having a dietitians group, I'll go. And I did this also for congressional representatives when we were, advocating for the bill. I would say, okay, we're gonna have a meeting. We're gonna talk to you about this, and then we're gonna do shots at the end. And you can do that when you're going to a college group. You can say we're gonna do shots at the end. And you can advertise it. But for the congressional briefing, I just said, we're gonna have refreshments. Well,
Mhm.
in both those cases, the refreshments were low protein medical foods and shots of formula. And it was great because I would educate them. And then, like you say, okay, well, this is, you're doing a shot. Individuals with these conditions have to eat this or drink this, 20 ounces of it
Yeah.
every day for their
Yeah.
entire lives. And it was the same thing with medical foods. I think that the shock for them was like, okay, great. These, we've got medical foods, we've got a pizza pocket or we've got something. And I'm like, yeah, but look at what we're paying for it if we don't have insurance. Look at the costs of it and understand that, because that's again sharing the real world experience of living with these conditions. Yes, we have these great options. It's not 30, 40 years ago when we had bread in a can and one formula. And I have friends who grew up that way and are
Yeah.
thrilled at all the options we have. But at the same time, going back to that question about, you know, high quality care, I mean, we don't have enough recognition that that is our fundamental treatment and that we need to cover it.
Mhm.
We need to make sure everyone has coverage for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've come a long way since the low protein food list for PKU, sometimes referred to as the PKU Bible, and it was published in 1989. Today, we have an online food list, mobile apps providing information in the palm of our hand, and we're more centered with the diet more than ever. How do digital tools help us bring the patient's voice to the forefront of research and healthcare?
Sure. Oh, this is my favorite topic. I mean, I always sort of respond to this by saying the low protein food list for PKU, as much as I complained and said, I'm not going to carry this around for 18 years, it was an innovation because
Yeah.
before Virginia Shuett, created it and founded National PKU News, all the metabolic dietitians were having to look up those foods, create their own lists, and distribute them. So the idea that we had this centralized resource that everyone agreed on and was sort of a standard of care was really a huge innovation. And how much we built on that by just making it a little bit easier to access. And those are care tools and those are essential in the daily lives. But if we look about how we're gonna sort of drive progress and move research forward. With these technologies, we have the opportunity to essentially create a living natural history. How are you feeling today? How were you feel, were you feeling tired? How was your mood? Any symptoms that you had? We can record those in real time. I always say that when I take Izzy into clinic and they say, "Okay, so how have you been for the past 6 months?" Well, we've got 9 minutes or something. How can we synthesize or even remember? How can you ask a 12-year-old, how have you been for the last 6 months, and have her really share things that might be really essential for the clinicians to understand, but she's
Yeah.
not going to be able to regurgitate that or summarize it. And so the idea that by using this tool in your daily life, by using the Flok app or another tool, um, to record how you're feeling, what you're eating, you know, sort of what you're experiencing in your daily life. And that might just be like, okay, I have 7 tests coming up next week, so I've got a lot of stress going on. That's important to understand because frankly, that stress affects your health. It affects your ability to sleep well. It likely affects whether you're eating regular meals, which again, is really important to understand in these conditions. So through something like the Flok app, we can build a living natural history. And
Mhm.
that can be used for yourself. Again, when you go in and advocate with your clinician and say, listen, I look at this, I've got, 3 migraine headaches over the last, month. What's going on with that? Can we look at whether my diet is related to that or whether my blood levels are affecting that? With technology, things like, Fitbits, Apple Watches, Aura Rings, we have the ability to see heart rate variability, temperature, all these fluctuations, which are either influencing or are markers of our health, and particularly metabolic health. Um, it's just opened up a whole new sort of area that can help us inform our understandings. And so, if there's a daily check-in, we talked about mental health, like if there's just a daily check-in of how you're feeling or the ability to take a measure about, depression, anxiety, fatigue, all of these things that are really, again, important to and can affect our metabolic health, but are also impacted by our metabolic health. If we can start to understand those and again, bring that picture together, whether it's just your personal picture or through contributing to research, you're saying, okay, this is my piece of this story. This is what my life looks like. And we end up through that sort of flipping um, the research pathways on their head. We're saying, okay, this is what individuals with the conditions are experiencing. This is what's important to us. These are the trends we see. Please go address them. These are the things that will improve our quality of life. Please focus on them. And we've got the data to back it up because it's that whole thing like, show me the data. Where we need to have that information, and technology really makes it so we can um, sort of bring that data together in a way that again is quantifiable and sort of digestible for research. And that's where we're going to see that progress.
That's great. Like, honestly, I couldn't have worded that better, Sarah, with how all of this is coming together and hopefully just creating more success and more information and helping us find more ways to remain healthy in the metabolic community. So, big question is, looking forward, what do you hope people living with a metabolic condition life could look like 10 years from now?
All right, this is another one where I'm going to want to hear your answer, but
Okay.
I think, I'm not a person with a metabolic condition. So I can have hopes for them, but again, I don't want to speak for anyone. I think for me, baseline needs are met. We have food, formula, and medications that address not only, you know, sort of the root manifestations of the condition, but any symptoms that come up, and that we don't have to constantly fight for them. Like
Yeah.
that's just sort of a baseline. We need that understanding and allowance for our conditions.
Mhm.
I think ultimately it goes back to that point I made about not just being satisfied, sort of good enough is not good enough. We've sort of been in a good enough position. Like we've got, we've got newborn screening. We're starting treatment early. We're able to
Mhm.
bring people back to treatment with new treatment, back to care with new treatments. But we're not seeing that progress. And so I think in order to create that progress, we need that better understanding of these conditions. Well, okay, you say, sort of status quo isn't good enough. What do you need?
Yeah.
Let's bring that understanding and that information in front of the scientific community and say, this is what we need. And so 10 years from now, I hope the scientific community is saying, okay, we've got it. And now I hope it's sooner than 10 years,
Yeah.
but I hope they're saying, okay, we've got it. We know what you need, and we're going to start focusing on that. And so living with a metabolic condition means not just settling for good enough or management or, not getting worse, but it means getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And it means having a better quality of life. And I don't know if something like diabetes is a model for that. People often say PKU is an invisible condition.
Mm-hmm.
And it is until you encounter a meal or a snack, which is, by the way, all the time. And so is there a model where, we have the ability, to, like you said, bring it up if we want to and say, I have this condition, but there should also be the opportunity to not center your condition and not have to tell everyone about your personal medical business when you sit down for lunch or you go out, for pizza or you go out for ice cream after a softball game. Like, let's take some of that burden off of the individuals with a condition to be explaining and teaching and accommodating all the time. And whether that's treatments or whether that's, I think it's treatments. I think it's better understanding. I think it's, probably some education of the larger community. But I think we need that. And I think one really important thing is, you put it 10 years in the future, like, okay, my kid will be 22, should be sort of college graduation age and she's going into the workforce. And then 10 years after that, she'll be 32 and then she'll be 42 and then she'll be 52. And right now we don't have an understanding of what it looks like to age with these conditions because all we've said is, okay, let's treat them from birth. And there, thousands of people who were not consistently treated because the medical science has evolved in that. And so we need to get to the point where everyone has access to care, everyone has a better understanding of their care, and the scientific community has, pathways for addressing those quality of life issues from birth until, the full lifespan that people are, we're very fortunate that people are able to live now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it definitely stems with options and information and learning, just all from being able to be educated to having options as the individual with a metabolic condition, going to be able to choose if you want to go on a new medication that's coming out, or if you want to be on the low protein diet, or if there's different um, foods to try or things like that. There's lots of options, but it's always great to be able to have more options, even with new medications coming out. New medication came out this year, just different things like that. The options are what gives us more control, maybe, and being able to have control makes you feel more better. I guess like that sounds.
That's empowerment. That's self-advocacy and empowerment.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah, and sharing your journey, both as a PKU parent and founder of Flok Health. It has been so empowering to hear your thoughts on the importance of self advocacy and the demand for scientific innovation. We've loved hearing about how Flok supports individuals and families in feeling more connected and supported in managing metabolic conditions. Now it's time for community conversations. In this segment, we'll ask questions you've submitted, giving us a chance to explore our guest stories from new and personal perspectives. Ready, Sarah?
Sure.
All right. So Rebecca Jennings asked a question. She said, living with a metabolic condition can be emotionally challenging for the entire family. From your perspective, what are some of the most effective strategies or resources for supporting mental health in this community?
All right. Well, I think I go back to community connections. I think my short answer to that is come to camp or connect with a local group in person. One of my so Flock runs two camps, one in Oregon, one in New Hampshire. And one of my favorite things about camp is that they're family camps. It's not a drop off camp. It's everyone can come, and that is kids with a condition and their parents, their aunts, their uncles, family friends. We've had family friends who live in Portland come join us at camp, and sort of get a sense of our experience. Um, it's also adults with conditions who bring their families, which I think is really powerful. Um, but my favorite thing about it is that, as I mentioned, I have two daughters. So I have a 16-year-old Samantha, and then her younger sister Izzy, who has PKU. And Sam goes to camp with us every year,
Mm-hmm.
as a whole family. And she now has friends who have PKU.
Yeah.
And so she understands it from a different perspective. Going back to that sort of storytelling brings empathy and understanding and connection. She hears her friends who aren't her little sister, because we all have relationships with our siblings that are different than we have with our friends. But she has friends who have PKU or another metabolic condition, and she gets to see it from their perspective, and that gives her empathy and understanding within our
Mm-hmm.
family. And at the same time, Izzy meets people who have siblings with a metabolic condition. And so she gets to understand, oh, what is it like to be a sibling of someone with PKU or some other condition? Which is That's going to give her a different understanding than it gives, when she looks at her older sister or teenage sister who,
Mm-hmm.
they're always having their sibling relationship. And so I think um that I think is really important from a perspective of the entire family and
Mm-hmm.
siblings. I think it's also good, grandparents who come to camp get to see what the daily life is like. They might not really understand it. They might say, it's, you got to cook these foods and you got to give the formula, but really being in the daily life of it is something, for a short time is really important. And then I think the other important thing about any in-person connection within the metabolic community is that, and we talked about this earlier, people just have a similar baseline. They, know what formula is. They know why maybe you're eating something or not eating something. You don't have to talk about that. I mean, you can, because people have, want to share experiences or want to share their learnings, but you also don't have to. And you can just take that sort of thing that is a little bit other and a little bit different than you and set it aside because everyone shares it. So it's not something different about your life, and you can focus on other things. And that, to me, sort of destigmatizing and normalizing having a metabolic condition is really empowering. It supports gaining confidence and just feeling like you're not alone, which are all those sort of wraparound things that support mental health.
I definitely agree. Camp is the best. I love, love, love it. I literally will start a countdown every January 1st for camp in the summer. But uh camp is just gonna be like there for any age too. Like the way that the parents can be on their own while the kids are playing in a different area. Everything is like everyone knows life, how we're living even if it's, like, different. Like, there's individuals with their G tubes, there's individuals with formula, low protein diet, and then, like, I even got to learn about MSUD. I get to learn about other metabolic conditions, which is also very cool and interesting and fun to relate with and connect with and learn differences as well. So, I think it's a great place to start. I think the power of connection and meeting at camp or the adult retreat or anything that you're able to go to, I would say get there. But that being said, we do have another question. Flock health emphasizes building connections among individuals in the metabolic conditions. Why do you believe community support is so crucial and how does it impact overall well being?
Okay, well, I think this is related to the mental health question. I mean, rare
Yeah.
disease is isolating. Like,
Mhm.
like I said, we have people who come to camp or who reach out and say, I've never met anyone with this condition. And the idea that you're alone in something is always scary. And so building that connection, whether it's in person or online or through email or through, that old fashioned telephone, um, the ability to just hear the voice and the story of someone who's experiencing something similar to you, I think is very comforting. Without that, in isolation, it's easy to give up hope or accept the status quo. I think
Yeah.
when you come together, um, you you have that support we've been talking about and that sort of shared understanding, but we also learn from each other. I mean, there's a lot going on in this community. Like you said, there's a variety of conditions, and they have different symptoms, and they have different treatments, and they have different things, they need to manage in their daily lives. Um, and that's, we have that even within PKU. I'll have people say, "Well, I hadn't heard of that, treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that treatment." And if someone has an experience with that treatment, they can share and they can learn. And so without talking to each other, if we just live in isolation, we're in that sort of state of of isolation and stasis and status quo. But the minute you connect with other people in whatever way you do, you are growing, you're learning, and it gives you hope and connection, which again goes back to that idea of all those things are necessary to protect your mental health and sort of grow your comfort with your condition. And I think we've talked a lot during this whole podcast about how everyone experiences things differently. So that's not going to be the same for everyone. But, I think in community, and however you define community, in person, online, whatever your method is, all of those things are supportive of you feeling like you're not alone, that there's capacity for learn, that there's a capacity or a potential for progress, and all of that gives us hope for that 10 years in the future, when we're all living a better quality of life for everyone in this community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that is all for the community questions. If you want to include a question in future episodes, keep an eye out on my social media, and I'll regularly ask for input from our community. As we wrap up today's show, remember that you can find helpful resources as well as more information from Sarah in the show notes below. Thank you for listening. We appreciate Sarah coming out, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Metabolically Speaking. Rare conditions, real stories, and a reminder that life with a metabolic condition is about living, not limits. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have a moment, please leave us a review. It helps others find their way here too. We'd also love to hear from you. If you have feedback, a story to share, or a question, send us an email. You'll find the address in the show notes below. Make sure to subscribe to Metabolically Speaking on your favorite podcast platform and tune in each month to join your tribe, breaking barriers and living without limits. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.